Kia ora tātou everyone. Haere mai. Welcome to this, our first webinar of 2024. It's really wonderful that you have signed up to be a part of this conversation today, which is one that the topic was a really strong theme at the World Parkinson's Congress in Barcelona last year, and one that we pay careful attention to here at Parkinson's New Zealand. I'm delighted to introduce to you, if you haven't met Christine already, Dr. Christine Mercer, who's the chair of our board. We're very fortunate to have Christine as the chair of our board because she holds a PhD in nursing and is still actively involved in teaching student nurses. But more importantly, she was the care partner for Bruce and walked the journey of Parkinson's with Bruce very closely. So this evening will be as much out of Christine's professional background as it will be out of her personal experience. Just wanting to say a note to the people with Parkinson's like me who are watching tonight, hopefully with your care partner sitting at your side, that it is tough listening sometimes when we're facing some of these struggles ourselves going forward, and the sense of burden that we will be placing on our families, not out of choice, but just because that's the way it is. So I just want to acknowledge that at the beginning, that these are tough things that we're talking about for care partners, but equally for us, the ones with Parkinson's. Just to remind you that you can ask questions throughout Christine's presentation. If you hover your mouse along the bottom of the screen, you'll see Q&A, and if you just log them in there, we get to about 40 minutes in, we'll change to a Q&A format. So please feel free to put your questions in there, and we'll get to those shortly. But Christine, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure I'm not sharing my screen.
You're not sharing your screen, no?
That's good. Lovely. Thank you. Oops, a daisy. No, I don't want you to share it. So, tēnā koutou katoa, te whakapapa ranga mai, ko tiranga, ko arana, ko Aotearoa pai whenua, te whenua tupu, kei papa maua o he noho ana, ko Christine Mercer o tēnā tātou katoa. I tried this morning and it's marginally better this afternoon. But who am I? Well, as I said in my pepeha, I have Scottish and Irish ancestry. I was born in Aotearoa and grew up in a farming district called Pai Whenua. I live in Papamoa and have done since 2006. And as Andrew has said, I'm Christine Mercer. I am still actively involved in my teaching as a registered nurse, teaching mainly postgraduate students in research supervision and a module in leadership and management. And Bruce was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2000, so it's been a huge learning curve for me. When I started preparing this webinar, I came across a PowerPoint presentation that I developed in 2015, nearly 10 years and lots of tears ago. And it was a presentation I did for my work colleagues at Wintec in the School of Nursing. After the presentation, many colleagues came up and said to me, I had no idea what it was like to live with someone who has Parkinson's. And I have found that that's been a real issue, that it is, as a nurse, you're expected to know, and as a nurse, you don't know at all. Now, this is my story. Some bits of it may resonate with you, and I'm hoping together we can take away the key factors of managing. I will share a lot of personal information with you, and I'll try not to tell you a sob story, but I must confess that there were lots of tears even as I spoke this morning. But there are some critical moments that I want to share with you. I ask that you respect the information that I am sharing. The people who at the time added to my angst are no longer in paid employment in New Zealand. So I want to go back a little bit in history. Bruce and I first met in 1972, and he had not long come back to New Zealand after his big OE. I was booked to go. And I will refer to this OE a little bit later as it became really significant in his later years of life. But in the meantime, 6 weeks after we started going out together, we became engaged to be married. It was my 21st birthday, and we did have a 6-month engagement just to prove that we were not getting married for any other reason apart from comfort. We did spend a large proportion of our early married life in and around Rotorua, and Bruce built us 2 homes. We moved into the first home on our first wedding anniversary, and the second he built out at Lake Karaka, which is just out of Rotorua. When our youngest son left home in 1996, we moved to Gisborne. We love Gisborne. In fact, Bruce went to Gisborne kicking and screaming, but he left Gisborne making an even bigger noise. And we bought a house there. In 2000, we moved from Gisborne to Hawke's Bay. It was then that I became more concerned about his well-being. Although in hindsight, Bruce may well have had the first aspects of Parkinson's when we were living at Lake Karaka. He had no sense of smell, he was depressed, he was prone to constipation, a very familiar story with lots of us. But when we moved to Hawke's Bay for my work, and in fact, the move to Gisborne had been for my work as well. But when we moved to Hawke's Bay, the house didn't sell as quickly or for as much as we thought that it ought. But I found myself having to make a lot more of the decisions and protecting Bruce from the angst that it was causing him. I also noticed a tremor, especially when we were in bed at night, and bradycardia when we were out walking. And Bruce used to love walking me to work, which was probably only about 1 kilometre, but it was taking him longer and longer to walk me to work. And I was also noticing that he couldn't walk and talk at the same time. When he was in Gisborne, he'd had quite a lot of building work, which he hadn't expected to do. But when we moved to Napier, this didn't last long. And what happened was that he was working on construction sites. He felt he was too slow and spending too much time in the loo. People were looking at him, people were talking about him. And he came home one day, he told me that he had, because he was always a very fussy, he always wanted a clean site. And so he was sweeping up the shavings one day, and this guy who'd been giving him quite a hard time and was quite derogatory came and spat in the shavings and said, "We'll clean that up too." And with that, we decided that he wasn't going to be in paid employment anymore. I recognised that he had Parkinson's, but at that time, the GP said, "No, I think he's got an essential tremor. Let's try him on beta blockers and see what happens for 12 months." Now, if I go back to Bruce's trip, his trip was actually the coming of age. He was born in Waitara, little wee country town in Taranaki. His oldest brother had died of tetanus when Bruce was only 2 years old. The brother was 14 years old. But his father never, ever got over the death of his eldest son. And he ended up by committing suicide when Bruce was 12. Bruce found his father and obviously had a dreadfully sad childhood. So leaving Waitara and going overseas was a huge thing for him. And while he was away, he'd kept a diary, which he was very diligent at writing this diary until he was in Russia, and he had spent the night with a girl named Joan, to whom he had become engaged. While we were in Taradale, because Bruce was no longer in paid employment, I persuaded him to start writing up his diary on the computer and keeping a record or making a record of that for his sons. And we ended up by inserting a whole lot of slides. The slides themselves were converted to a CD-ROM, which again became really important in his later life. when people were talking about Bruce having his tremor, and although I knew he had Parkinson's, I was saying, well, no, he can't have it because the GP says he hasn't got it. And so in lots of ways, it was, I think my colleagues thought that I was in denial, and maybe I was, because he certainly was showing classic signs of Parkinson's. When he was finally diagnosed, there were three things that the neurologist said which had quite an impact. One was, you're lucky you've got Parkinson's, not Alzheimer's. The other was that you don't want to join the Parkinson's Society, as that's for old people. And the third thing, when on a later visit to that neurologist, I said that Bruce was sexually impotent. And Bruce, being a typical male, went, oh, Christine, don't say anything about that. And so the GP wrote to the neurologist wrote to our GP and told him that, yes, while there was impotence, it was obviously a problem for his wife and not him so much. I was 50 years old and Bruce was only 56. So to be asked or told that you can forget employment, you can forget all these other things, and you can forget your intimacy, was really dismissive, very dismissive. At the same time that Bruce, sort of around that period of diagnosis, he was having dreadful nightmares. And he would wake up about 2 o'clock in the morning, absolutely convinced that there was an intruder in the house or in our bed. If the intruder was in the house, he would leap out of bed, take the duvet with him, run off down the hallway. And of course, you're waking up thinking, oh my goodness. If the intruder was in our bed, he would punch. And obviously it was me that he was hitting. And I was wondering what the hell was going on, because at this point, he had not been diagnosed. He was writing up his diary. I wondered if he was reminiscing about, or if he was wanting to leave me, but didn't actually know how to say it. And so this was one way of taking us apart. I felt very much like a battered wife, as I never knew when the nightmares or the punches would occur. But as a result of those, I was lying awake at night. And because I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't doing my own work, and therefore I was in trouble. When I told my nursing colleagues about this, their answer, or their response was, we'll sleep in separate rooms. Now, as those of you who are support partners, you know that you can't go into a separate room, because if you hear banging, then you're wondering if someone's fallen out of bed or if they're okay. And so it's much better to be in the same room. When I explained to my line manager, because I was in big trouble at work, she said her uncle had Parkinson's. She'd never heard of the nightmares, and she didn't believe me. So again, I felt incredibly socially isolated. And remember, it was my choice to go to Hawke's Bay for my work, but I felt very trapped, incredibly trapped, because we had this job, we had a house, we had a mortgage, and I couldn't just up and leave. And Bruce wasn't in paid employment any longer. I was being project managed at work, but I couldn't share any of what I was obliged to do with Bruce, because he had lost his ability to temper any of his reactions, and his interference would have only made things worse. He would have been highly likely to have gone to my line manager and said, treat my wife like that and I'll punch your lights out. Would have made things much, much worse. And so it again added to that loneliness and inability to cope. So what helped? What made a difference? Part of it was that the acknowledging that was a stranger had moved into the house. So the late Princess of Wales famously said there were three people in our marriage. Well, this is certainly the case for us. Living with a person with Parkinson's, not often people with Parkinson's will say that they don't need the nurse yet. as they were waiting until it got worse. But without that assistance, that frightening aspects of dealing with this stranger are experienced in, as I say, in isolation. And so when we came to live in Papamoa in 2006, I got in touch with the field officer at that time. Bruce had actually gone to one of the exercise classes, which was run by the field officer, was very unstructured. Because they didn't have the skills to be able to do it. But and he came home and he said, these people are old, they're much worse than me. I don't want anything to do with Parkinson's. But I got in touch with the field officer and said there has to be people who are still in paid employment, but living with Parkinson's. And we ended up by hosting a dinner party. Well, I think it was about 30, 35 people came for dinner, and they were all under the age of 65, didn't know each other, very relieved to find out that there were similar people around. But we were able to talk and realize that we were not alone, that we weren't necessarily all looking for answers, but we just wanted to know that other people were getting on with life as well. And we formed a very strong cohort of people, some of which I still have a lot to do with. Absolutely essential. Another thing that assisted was, and I'll just share my screen now, was sorry, I'm going to share my screen with you in a second when I get back, because I want to show you a photo of what Bruce looked like in 2006. And he was, as you know, people with Parkinson's have got bradykinesia, they've got an inability to manage their movements. They are doing all these things. But in fact, this was a photo that of Bruce going rock climbing at the end of 2006. Because he was used to scaling ladders, he was incredibly competent at scaling up that honeycomb rock to the top and then abseiling down. No problem at all. I was the one that had great difficulty and couldn't do a bit of it. But Bruce could, because he was good at doing the things that he'd been doing for a long time before. And then, as I say, I wrote this article, which was published in the Journal of Primary Healthcare, and I'll make sure that this particular aspect, this particular reference is available to you. The article was looking at the chronic sorrow that describes that roller coaster ride that we're all on. For me, it wasn't the physical components of Bruce having Parkinson's at all. It was the non-motor elements. There was the need to have to be patient. There was the need, and I was saying earlier that I was reading an article at the doctor's surgery in the days when doctors had magazines at their surgery. And this person had said, of course, you have to be very patient. And I thought, don't tell me to be patient, because I'm patient already. I do not need instructions on that. But it is about having to be patient and having others understand your patience. It's the translating the masked facial expressions, actually realizing that when they're glaring, they're thinking, they're not glaring at you. One of the things that I really missed was the loss of the sense of humor. Bruce had a sense that when we were laughing, I was laughing at or laughing about, but not laughing with him. And I had to be very careful about laughing, or particularly if he could not hear me, who I was sharing the joke with. There was a lack of spontaneity. We couldn't suddenly decide, let's do something exciting, because he needed to process that and couldn't manage it at all. There was real difficulty going away for holidays. There was a very much a restriction on our social life. I found that we were having a conversation and there were lots of people there. He would retreat into himself, or he would join the conversation that had been going on before, and the conversation moved on. So I had to keep going back and saying, yes, that's right. And the major thing for me was disturbance of sleep. Waking up, being disturbed at least 2 or 3 times a night in the latter stages. Obviously, our relationship changed. We changed from being partners in crime to becoming, for me, taking on more and more responsibility, but also being very mindful that because you never knew what the mental or physical capability would be, that you were always trying to anticipate, is today a good day? Is this next half an hour going to be a good half an hour? But then anticipating and working out when to intervene, but when not to take over. I also had to be remarkably mindful that I felt very disloyal when I was talking about him. And as Andrew alluded to at the beginning of this, that whole disloyalty, if someone was on the phone, I would just have to say, no, everything's fine, I'll give you a ring later. But then often didn't get a chance to ring later because he was always wanting to know what I was saying, always pretending that everything was all right when in fact it wasn't. Or when Bruce would, when he would say he was capable of doing something, and I would say, well, I don't think you are. And I was remembering a time when I said to him, will he be highly offended if I cut the lawns? But if he could get the lawnmower started, and I would cut the lawns. And so I was going along cutting the lawns, and he was standing at the end of the row. So of course I had to jiggle so that I didn't run his toes over. And then he was saying to me, you're going over that bit of grass too much. And so then I would do the next thing, and I would turn around to come back for the next row, and he was standing at the end of the row. Once again, I got a big, huge lecture about going over that little bit of lawn too much. I do love him, you know that. Yes, but I also did develop another article, but it was never published. And one of the support partners said it was when they were reading the article, and the reason it wasn't published was because the reviewers said it was just too tough to read, that this couldn't possibly be reality in living with someone with Parkinson's. And I just didn't have the courage. I have pulled it out a couple of times and had a look at it. But one of the support partners said that that it was really nice to know that other people were in the same boat. And so some of the quotes from the article was, he told his boss, and within days he was demoted and moved sideways. This was totally demoralizing for him in terms of his self-esteem. Another person said, we still have a mortgage and no real savings. We were absolutely stricken with what our financial situation might be and had no one really to discuss this with. I found that more and more I've taken over the finances. He cannot cope with the stress of the future, long-term plans, and sometimes I'm blindsided with fear about our and my future. So towards the end of 2018, Bruce's Parkinson's became very debilitating. And I'm just going to share another photo with you. So this is a photo of him. No, on that one. This is a photo of Bruce whitebaiting, probably about in the latter stages of 2017, 2018, when he'd had Parkinson's for nearly 18 years. To enable him to go whitebaiting, we used to go to a much smaller creek where there was often just the two of us. And I became very mindful that if he'd fallen in the creek, I couldn't get him out. And so we had to change places, or sites, so that he could go whitebaiting. And this is the Kaituna River, much bigger, faster river. And so I was always really nervous, but there were other people around. Our eldest son bought him the life jacket that he wore, and it was one of those life jackets that if he'd fallen into the water, it would have kicked off into action. We didn't want to test it, obviously. And I really, really wanted to be able to have one of those kids, those bridles that you can hold on so that when they go down, because when he got nearer the water and he was often unsteady on his feet, and I thought, this just would not look good in my CV if he'd drowned, or if he'd had an accident, or if he'd fallen. And yeah, it was very, very challenging in order to be able to get him to do something that he loved doing. Incredibly challenging and incredibly in some ways, again, having to justify to others that he could do this because he could do it before. But yes, I would never let him go whitebaiting on his own. And he went with our son quite often, and actually our son took us over to a much better part of the Kaituna River, where Bruce did fall, but he could get up again. It was safer for him to do so. And so towards the end of 2018, he became more debilitated, and we had gone away on a cruise, which was really, I have to say, a wonderful holiday for me, because somebody else did all the cooking, somebody else came in and made the bed, somebody else. All I had to do was to sit on the balcony and read a book or sleep, and I slept and slept and slept, and Bruce also slept. We were quite obvious as a couple, and Bruce at that point had a beautiful it was actually called a talking stick, not a walking stick, and it was carved with Māori carvings, and it's the sticks that kaumātua use on the marae, the beautiful ones. Because it was beautiful, because it wasn't a walking stick, Bruce didn't mind using it. And we became very obvious. But when we would go down to the dining room, we were placed at a table that was a long way from the door, and Bruce could not negotiate his way around the chairs, and particularly when it was time for us to leave the dining room and he had to be escorted out, and the waiters would come and give him a hand. And my first impressions are, people will think he's drunk. People will be so worried about that. So you're trying to hold your head up high, but actually wanting to cry with shame. And there was a lovely table of Australians. And so I did explain to them that Bruce had Parkinson's, because we had to walk past their table every night. And I explained that he had Parkinson's. And on probably the last night we were there, he was actually taken out in a wheelchair. And this lovely Aussie guy said, "Oi, that's cheating." And Bruce just turned around and went, and I thought, it's that again, humour that so often is lost, that he managed to bring back. We also went to Norfolk Island for a holiday. We've got friends who've got a home there, and so went and stayed with them. But on this particular occasion, the flights between New Zealand and Norfolk Island were they weren't direct flights anymore. We had to stay in Sydney, so we stayed in Sydney on the way over, and then again on the way back. And on the way over, I walked down to the local supermarket and got a bottle of wine. Came back, said to Bruce, "Gosh, I'm pleased you didn't walk with me, because we had to go across a set of traffic lights, and there were 3 lanes of traffic going in both directions." So when we went to to come home. And again, I needed another bottle of wine. I did drink a lot of wine at that time, but so I needed this bottle of wine. And Bruce said, I'll come for a walk to the supermarket with you. And I said, well, only as far as the traffic lights. Well, we got to the traffic lights and he said, no, I think I can cross that road. So we were halfway across the road and the lights changed and the traffic started to move and Bruce froze. I grabbed him and dragged him across the traffic lights, got to the other side, and he was an absolute quivering wreck. He was an absolute quivering wreck. I couldn't leave him at the traffic lights and go up and get the wine and come back because I didn't know whether he would try and cross the road again by himself. So I got him to walk probably, I don't know, half a kilometre up the road to the supermarket. We got to the supermarket and Bruce needed a trolley to lean on. And they were magnetic, but you have to put your $2 in. But someone had given me a trolley and he was leaning on the trolley. We went through the supermarket, got our milk and our yogurt and our banana for breakfast. And of course, you can't buy alcohol at this particular supermarket. So as we left the supermarket, the trolley, the magnetic wheels came down and it wouldn't move. And there's a big, huge announcement over the thing, with the lady in the blue dress, please return her trolley. I can't remember. I was just, got Bruce into the liquor store and bought the wine. When we came out, I was begging for taxis, please, to take us back to the hotel, but they wouldn't because what they could see were a drunken couple with wine in their hand, and they weren't going to have them in their taxis. And so we had to walk home again or walk back to the hotel again, which just took forever. It just took forever because I was just trying to coach Bruce along for every little step of the way. And the wine actually tasted foul, I have to say. One of the other things that I found that made me cope was that I carried on with my work. I had a dream job at Wintec where I had got a contract and I was for 10 hours a week. So I would go over on a Monday morning, stay with our son on that night and come home Tuesday afternoon. And that worked for a long time until I realized that Bruce could not stay at home by himself any longer. It was just getting harder and harder. And so I said to my line manager there, look, I just can't renew my contract. And I was talking to another colleague and I was bereft. And she said, why are you so upset? And I said, because having this work is a legitimate reason to leave the house. I found more and more that I could not leave the house without Bruce, except if I was going to work. And in order to have a little bit of time for me, I just needed to be able to do that. I was also reminding that if we wanted to go to the supermarket, and I'd say to Bruce, I'll just duck down and get a bottle of milk. And he'd say, I'll come for a drive with you. Okay. So before he could go to the supermarket, he needed to go to the loo. And he would do that, and it would take ages. And then he would, right, we're ready to go. And then we'd get to the mall and, well, I probably just need to go to the loo while we're here. And so initially I would, he would go by himself and then I would need to go with him. And then we would get into the supermarket. And because he couldn't walk around the supermarket without the leaning on anything, we would have a trolley. And so we would put our bottle of milk in the bottom of the trolley and we would push past the checkout and we would push the trolley back to the car, and he'd get in the car and I'd push the trolley back, and our 5-minute trip to the supermarket would take an hour. So again, just factoring that in and not letting Bruce know that he was a burden. And the other thing that I drew a lot, it was my faith in the church. And Bruce ended up, although he hadn't been a churchgoer when we first met, he did get a lot of comfort out of the church, and it was just something, again, where we were accepted for what we are or who we are, and no demands were made on being perfect. What added to the stress? Well, the sleepless nights. Sleepless nights were I have always needed to have my beauty sleep, and it hasn't done me any good because I've been waiting every day for the beauty, but I really could not cope with, and it wasn't that I was waking up and not sleeping, it was I was being disturbed and not being able to sleep, and then tossing and turning, and although we ended up in single beds, but I could hear the sheets moving. And so then I would think, oh, is Bruce needing to get up? So I'd get up and help him, you know. So, but sleeping with one eye half open and your ears in constant alert. When Bruce in 2019, he fell and fractured his neck of femur. Is there some reason why I've suddenly disappeared? He fell and fractured his neck of femur, and he was admitted, obviously, to hospital. I was thinking about that earlier this afternoon because I thought I had lost him mentally. And it's all very well knowing that this is likely to happen, but when it happens, why does he have to be so normal? And he rang me about 2 days post-op. The first day post-op, he'd actually tried to get out of bed and he'd fallen again. He had ripped his catheter out. And so he had to be specialed. And then on this particular night, he rang me and he said, call the police, call the police. The people, the invaders have come in and they're taking over. They've got AK-47s and they're taking over the ward. And I said, well, how come you're allowed to phone me? And call the police. Don't bother asking silly questions like that. Call the police. And, and I'm thinking, what's going on in your mind? How can I reach out to you and assure you that everything's okay? So I tried to persuade him to let me talk to the nurses and find out what was happening. I think in the finish he gave up. He gave up because I was just a bad choice of people to help. I also learnt the art of voice texting, because one of our eldest son was in Fiji at the time, and he could phone me. I could text him and he could phone me, but I couldn't phone him. Anyway, he sent this text one day, my son did. Is it okay to ring? Is it a good time? And I sent a text back. What I said in my text and what came out were quite different. So what I said was, Dad's not good. I have to get someone to come and sit with him. And when I do, I just need to go and find a quiet corner to cry and, have a conversation. Because again, there was all that feeling of being incredibly disloyal. Anyway, Sean sent the text back and he said, I get the gist. I didn't quite understand what you said. And I had a look at what I'd said. Was Dad's not good. That was right. I need to go out into the lawn and I need to do a whole lot of the things. And in fact, it did me the world of good to read it because it was very, very funny. So after Bruce had his fractured neck of femur and he was in hospital for quite some time, and then but I couldn't manage him at home for probably about 2 months after that. He then needed permanent residential care. So he went into residential care at the beginning of March in 2020. And for those of you with good memories will recognise the fact that we then had a national lockdown with COVID. Bruce was saying at the time, we've got to go home. I've got to go home. Look, that's what Jacinda is saying. And as an aside, Jacinda Ardern's great-grandparents and my great-grandparents were one and the same. So Bruce knew that she was a cuzzy bro. And he would say to staff, get Christine to phone Jacinta. She'll be able to sort it all out. And I've got to go home. And he was then also looking for a flight of stairs to throw himself down, because he just wanted to commit suicide and end all of this misery for himself. I have to say a big thank you to the residential care, because they let me come and live with Bruce for 7 weeks. So for 7 weeks, I went into lockdown. I had my own room, which I don't think I could have coped sharing a room with him. It was bad enough every time every time a resident gets out of bed, they step on the mats that send the alert bells. So I heard every call bell, because I wonder if, is that Bruce that's fallen out of bed? Is he okay? Type of thing. And so I didn't sleep very much, and I was but very grateful that I had much better quality, and I could at least be with Bruce, and he was much more settled when he knew that I was there. And he said to me, I did that to protect you, because I thought, yes, darling, you really are trying to look after me. And I did have, so when I left Malyon, not long after I left Malyon, my GP had arranged for me to have counselling. And I have to say that it was the best thing that I could have had. It was very therapeutic. I had always not wanted counselling because I thought it was going to cost a fortune, and perhaps it was a fortune that we couldn't afford. But the GP arranged it, and it didn't cost me anything. And yeah, it was obviously much needed. Over that period of time, so between March of 2020 and August of 2021, Bruce developed a behavioural psychological symptoms of dementia. It's quite a different form of dementia. He had logical moments, but he also had illogical moments. Trying to explain to the staff, and I didn't know what BPSD was. I have since found out a lot about it, but trying to explain to the staff, or sometimes providing information about, the person with Parkinson's, and this is why they're upset and agitated, I have to say, I got often met with disdain. I did give an article to one of the nurses one day, and she just threw it in the corner. And I thought, yeah, so basically Bruce was in trouble. He was expected to be accountable for his actions, but he actually couldn't be accountable for his actions. And I'm not saying that it was the BPSD that at times when he just could not be accountable for his actions. And he really suffered. And one of the things that he really suffered with was the urge incontinence that occurs at night time. And he couldn't afford to wait for the staff to help him out of bed. So he ended up, if the bed was, he hated the incontinence products, he would, I would say to them, why not put a bottle beside his bed? But it was just not working, and he felt he was in trouble for being incontinent. They felt that he was being a nuisance and naughty, because after all, he'd been to the toilet 20 minutes beforehand. Why did he need to go again? Bruce would ring me a lot. In fact, just after he moved into the residential care place, he rang me at 3 o'clock one morning. When I'd actually gone away for the weekend, but he rang me at 3 o'clock to tell me that he had been in touch with the police because he felt that he was in the wrong place. But then he thought maybe he'd made a mistake calling the police. So he thought he'd better tell me that this is what he'd done. In 2021, in August 2021, Malyon could no longer manage Bruce, and so he was transferred to Allthorpe, which was a psychogeriatric unit. He was transferred on the Tuesday or whatever it was, and Tuesday night there was notification that there had been that new variant of Delta in Auckland, Auckland was in lockdown, and so was the residential care place, and I could not go and see him. And he rang, and he totally lost the plot. He was in a place where he didn't know anyone. His wife wasn't coming to see him. He was abandoned. He was then transferred to the dementia ward. He was, because they couldn't manage him in the hospital ward, he rang me and I could hear yelling and banging and people with dementia in the background. And Bruce is saying to me, "You've put me in the loony bin." And he was right. But I was so powerless to be able to do anything about it. It was providing that love. And he wasn't convinced that I did love him. At that point, he decided I didn't love him. He'd given me his wedding ring back. I didn't know what the implications of that were. Was I now free? And the more I tried to convince him that I loved him, the more he just would fretted if I wasn't there. And of course, I wasn't there because of COVID. So he was transferred from he'd been on the waiting list to go into the mental health for the older person ward at Tauranga Hospital, a specialist unit that deals with people who are obviously critically unwell, and Bruce was critically unwell. And one of the things that I recognised very early on was that one of my former students was nursing Bruce. And so I said to Bruce, "Look, Kerry's here. He was a student of mine. He'll take care of you." Kerry, in the meantime, actually freaked out because he thought I was back as a lecturer. I wasn't as there as Bruce's wife. All I wanted to do was to reassure Bruce that he would be kept safe. But there were two nurses who were absolutely superb. I'm not saying that the others weren't, but there were two that would just stand out, and so gentle and so facilitating for me being Bruce's wife. And at that point, I had actually got all of Bruce's old slides, and I had converted them to onto a CD roll. It was actually a memory stick, big memory stick. And he would constantly have this slideshow, and he would be able to share and say to the exact moment that each of these photos were taken, who was he with. Because he really had such a wonderful adventure when he was younger. And one of the nurses later did her whole master's thesis on the non-motor components of BPSD, and I had supervised her, and she said the inspiration for starting that process was watching Bruce watch those slides and realizing that how to engage with him on another level. When Bruce went back to Allthorpe, I found that there were a lot of international nurses, and it was very difficult because they were all having to wear masks. Understanding them or knowing that Bruce understood them was really difficult. He was admitted at that point. He was full-time in the dementia unit. He had two people who were wandering into his room and would throw themselves onto his bed, but he was too physically paralyzed to be able to do anything about it, and he just hated it. He cringed. He crawled into himself. He withdrew. He didn't really want to be out in the dining room. He would for every time that he could, he would have meals in his room, and I would spending all day, just about all day, every day, and getting home later in the afternoons. I would try and always said, look, I've got to be home before dark, because I hated going home to a dark house. It wasn't the empty house, but it was dark, in case the boogeyman was there. And one of the other things I found too was that the nurses would speak very loudly to Bruce, and I kept saying, he's softly spoken, but he's not deaf. You don't have to yell at him. You have to make sure that he can get a chance to yell at you so that you actually hear what he's saying. And it was COVID yet again that was the final undoing. Since September of 22, Bruce got COVID, and the wing that he was in isolation. And again, he would ring me up and he'd say, why can't you come in? He was in isolation probably for about 2 weeks. And it was while he was in isolation at this time that he decided he would stop taking his tablets. And I said, well, just hang on until I get there, because then I can support you in making this decision and make sure that your message is got through. So he did do that. He did wait until I could get to see him again, and I checked that you really wanted to come off your tablets, and yes, he did. And he died on the 17th of October 2022, 10 days before my birthday, and 10 days short of us being engaged for 50 years, or being together for 50 years. But there are a lot of comments. Oh, look, I've gone over time again, sorry. But there are a lot of comments that were made earlier and lots of questions. And some of the comments that were made were talking about the guilt, the emotions, the feeling of why can't I put my head on your pillow again? And I was saying this morning that I did bring Bruce home only once when he went into residential care, and we shared a bed, and as we got into bed and we cuddled, and Bruce put his toe up against my foot, and it scratched like that. So I moved my foot over, and his feet came over, and so anyway, I didn't get any sleep, or very little sleep. I had fallen asleep but 9 o'clock in the morning, I said to him, because then he was really, really, really cold, unbelievably cold, like someone was like, and I was trying to cuddle him, and about 9 o'clock in the morning, we're having breakfast. I said, golly, that was a rough night, wasn't it? That was a really rough night. And he said, yes. He said, I thought with you having had your counselling, you'd have got yourself sorted out by now. So, the guilt never goes away. It just brings back, reading those things. Somebody else has asked, how did you balance the role of being a wife or caregiver? I find some of the personal cares, for example, toileting, really difficult to balance, and being a loving partner. And again, it brought to mind an example of Christmas of 21, and I had brought Bruce home and my younger son and his wife were there as well, and we had come home, and then we were going to go round to my other son's place for Christmas Day, and Bruce needed to go to the toilet. And on that particular instance, my son had to help lift him up and hold him, and while Bruce had a bowel motion, so while I was trying to clean him up, it was very undignified for my son. It was not necessarily an unknown, because I had got used to wiping Bruce's bottom quite a few times, but it was very, very undignified. But for my son, and after before Bruce went back to residential care, he said he needed to go to the toilet again. And so we came home, and once again, my younger son lifted him up. And at this point, Bruce had a bowel motion on the floor of the shower. So we got him seated on the toilet, and I did have gloves on, lots of gloves on, but I scooped up this bowel motion in my hand, and I went running to the other toilet to try and get rid of it. And my daughter-in-law was sitting on the toilet. So here I am with this handful of bowel motion. What am I going to do now? Yeah, it's not easy at all. Remaining as a wife, it isn't. It isn't. So, Andrew, have we got some questions? I'm trying to keep my time down.
I think we all just need to take a breath, because you've shared with a depth and a passion and emotion that has touched, I'm sure, everyone who's listening tonight. Thank you for your honesty and for sharing and trusting us with your story. That's a very precious honor, gift that you have given. And of course, it resonates for me. I was saying this morning that when my dad had Parkinson's, we cohabited. My parents came and lived in our home, and I used to have to do the weekend caring. His dad showers coming in 3 times a week, but on the weekend was my job. And it's a very strange thing to have to do as a son. And I think I could do it for my dad. I would never be able to do it for my mum. But yeah, that's where sons or daughters become part of the caregiving team is really quite difficult. How did your boys find it?
Yes, they found it. Our eldest son, his way of interacting and supporting was making sure that he had a coffee every week, that we would see him, but he couldn't bring himself to provide that personal care. He would help Bruce back into the car, but he would not engage at all in any of those personal cares. I think Brian, possibly because they live in Hamilton, and so if they came over, they were staying, obviously. So yeah, he hated it, but he would much rather do that than see me suffer. And I can remember one particular occasion that we had the whole family around, and I had disappeared with Bruce for ages to the loo, to the point where Brian came down to see if I was okay, and Sean, I think, then realised, golly, this caring, does take a long time. There's only so many times that you can talk among yourselves, thinking, well, where the heck is my father and my mother?
Yeah, and I think one of the roles that children can play is helping with the guilt and helping the care partner to finally take the decision.
Yes.
I can remember participating in that with my dad when he had to go into residential care. So some of the questions that are coming in, Christine, someone saying, I've got a family member who's been diagnosed in their early 40s. What do you do first when it's early onset?
The first thing you need is actually to have that support. I forgot to say this morning, the Parkinson's nurse is absolutely critical to keep me informed so that I wasn't going insane. It's making sure that, and so early diagnosis, getting onto that medication, because the moment Bruce was on medication, that he then was able to participate in, he'd lost that he never gained the speed with which he could walk before, but he certainly lost that very slow bradykinesia. He lost that that inability to think slowly. The dopamine really did work. And so that's really essential. When he was first diagnosed, of course, there was some whole thing about, don't start on the medication because it'll wear out at the other end. And I mean, I think there is a little bit of that around, but actually the earlier you can start a medication, the earlier you can get into specific exercise, the better. It's absolutely essential. Yeah.
The exercise, I mean, I can attest to that. I was finally diagnosed at 55. I'm 60 now. And seeing a neurophysio, getting onto one of these LSVT or PD Warrior or Counterpunch or one of these specific exercises, and having to do it regularly.
Yes.
It's the exception. On the days where I don't exercise are the exceptions, not the days that I do exercise. And certainly for early onset in your 40s, you've got a long road to go. And getting onto the meds and getting into the exercise program. Diet is also another one. And also just knowing when to take the meds, taking them on an empty stomach, knowing that protein combats and it stops the uptake, trying not to get constipated because then the meds don't digest as well. all those simple tricks if you're in your 40s. And as Christine says, our Parkinson's educators, it's a free service. We almost cover the whole country. There's a self-referral form on our website that you can just click on. Whether you are a person with Parkinson's or a care partner, both can be referred into our service. And if we can't see you face to face, if you can't get to one of the support groups, then we'll do it like this over video. So that help, that support is there. As someone comments, you're amazing, Christine. Thank you so much. I have a lot of this in the future, but it's good to know I'm not alone. Thank you for the idea of getting some counseling. And another one, thank you so much for your honesty. So much I can relate to. You have given me reassurance that I'm not on my own. And I think that's also the message that when you're out for the count, and my mum was the same. I can remember a sense of desperation when she'd come home with satin sheets and she'd come home with knives and forks made for people who are disabled. And you try anything, the sense that the desperation, you've been up 6 times at night, you're exhausted. Knowing that you're not alone, if there's someone who understands at the end of the phone, you can just listen to your lament, your cry for help is just so helpful in that hour of need. So please reach out if you are having any sort of real struggles at home, and our Parkinson's educators will be more than happy to spend some time with you. And one of the one question, Christine, just you mentioned BPSD, but folks are saying what is that exactly?
Okay, so it's behavioral, psychological symptoms of dementia, and it affects the frontal lobe. And as the nurse practitioner Tony Lawson pointed out, it's almost as if, in fact, what people who had depression, and that's what they were having a lobotomy for, because you've got your whole frontal lobe and it's wired for sound, and it's just yeah, so sometimes the wires connect, sometimes they don't, sometimes they frizzle his hair. Bruce went very bald, you know. I'm sure that it was all part of this sort of whole wired for sound. And he would I mean I was talking earlier to Andrew and saying that because Bruce, I said to him towards the end, look, I'm really tired. I'm getting really tired. And I, you know, and he said, yes, he said, I've been thinking about this. You're tired. Why don't we hire a motorhome and go down to the South Island? We could have, he said, admittedly, you'll have to do all the driving. And I said, oh, okay. And then he said, what we could do is pack 21 sets of sheets so that you don't have to go to the laundromat all the time. And I said, oh, so how do you think you'd manage at nighttime? Oh, he said, you're just putting obstacles in my way. So this illogical self, this inability to have insight, and this, I mean, there were other occasions when Bruce was very, very unwell, and he would just lie in bed, curled up like a little fetal position, just go, oh, oh, oh. And of course that, you know, you're hearing that over the phone and you're trying to say, it's okay, dear. So it's different. It's a different dementia from Alzheimer's, because Bruce always knew when, how long, and why I hadn't been here. And then somebody else has written in their thing today that when they go and see their husband, and if he's fallen asleep, you know, well, you've buggered off after 5 minutes, not noticing the fact that you've been sitting there for 3 or 4 hours.
Well, Christine, thank you. You've shared a wealth of knowledge with us, and it's been wonderful to spend this time with you. If there's just one more question, yes. Just thank you so much for your time and honesty. We really appreciate it. So that's a lovely way to end. Christine, thank you so much. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you so much for listening in tonight. You will be sent a link. It has been recorded, and you will be sent a link to our YouTube channel within the next 5 days, so that you can watch it again if that's helpful to you. But again, please self-refer through our referral, through our website, and Parkinson's New Zealand is here to help people with Parkinson's, their caregivers, and their whānau to navigate this. As we were saying this morning, you don't die of Parkinson's, you die with Parkinson's. So it tends to be a bit of a long road that we have to walk together. So get the help in early. Demand to see your neurologist. You know, the neurologist service is way oversubscribed. They really are busy. But, you know, if you need to see a neurologist, if you haven't seen a neurologist for 2 years, you know, just get on the phone and say, we need to see them. Ask your partner educator for support. Get the help that you need, and the best to all of you for listening in today. And thank you so much, Christine, again for your generosity of storytelling. Thank you.
And thank everyone for their support. Really appreciate it.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
I know.